If you're going to start something, at least make sure you're ready to finish it. The words slipped from the man in the leather jacket before the bar had even settled into its usual evening rhythm, and for a brief second, the entire room paused, caught between curiosity and the uneasy tension that always blooms before something goes wrong. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. Inside the rusted lantern, a dim old bar tucked against the San Diego waterfront, Captain Emily Hartman moved with the quiet steadiness of someone who had learned to mask every thought. To her customers, she was just Emily, the new bartender who kept the place clean, poured drinks with a gentle smile, and avoided unnecessary conversations. But beneath that calm surface, every sense she had, every instinct sharpened from years in military intelligence, stayed alert. The wooden floor creaked under her boots as she wiped down the counter for the third time, though she wasn't really looking at the wood. She scanned faces, movements, the subtle shifts in posture that revealed tension long before words did. It had become second nature, almost a pulse beneath her skin, always watching, always measuring, always waiting for the moment when the air changed. She hated how easily she had gotten used to living under an alias. Hated how routine it felt now to pretend she was someone softer, quieter, someone who didn't once lead covert teams through stolen weapons investigations that had cracked open entire networks. But Colonel Marianne Reeves trusted her more than anyone else to track the smugglers slipping military hardware through the port, trusted her enough to place her here, right in the middle of the noise. It was nearing 2:30 p.m., the hour when sunlight slanted through the high windows in thin, uneven stripes, and conversations dipped into a lower, lazier register. Yet Emily felt something shift, small, nearly invisible, but unmistakable to someone trained like her. The bar's atmosphere tightened, the way a room does when a storm waits just beyond the door. She'd felt this sensation before missions that turned violent. It always started with the quiet. The door burst open just then, bringing with it a gust of laughter and heavy boots. 5 Marines stumbling inside with exaggerated swagger. The sound crashed against the walls and filled the room with a chaotic energy that didn't quite match their sloppy entrance. Emily watched them with the shallow breaths of someone who pretended not to observe too deeply. But then she saw Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox. He stumbled like the rest, but his eyes were too sharp, too focused, too calculating. Emily forced her breaths to slow. She couldn't afford to react, not yet. Maddox let his gaze sweep over the bar before landing on her. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly, like he was checking something off a list. She pretended not to notice, turning instead to stack newly washed glasses, the towel brushing rhythmically against cool glass. From the corner of her eye, she saw the Marines settle at a table, loud and sloppy, but their movements were too synchronized. They were actors trying to look unscripted. Emily's ribs tightened with a quiet, controlled breath. The tension grew almost imperceptibly. A few regulars shifted in their seats. Someone rubbed their arm as though the air had suddenly grown colder. Emily recognized the signs, the way a room bends when something dangerous hides beneath ordinary noise. She caught the faint reflection of Maddox as he stood. His chair scraped slightly, the legs dragging just enough to be heard, but not enough to appear intentional. He approached the bar with a loose swagger, the kind meant to fit a casual drunk Marine. But Emily saw the truth in his shoulders, the readiness, the command in his step. She reached for another glass, prepared to feign indifference, when his hand clamped around her wrist. The touch was wrong, controlled, measured, deliberate. Emily didn't flinch, didn't widen her eyes, didn't even tense her shoulders. She simply turned her head, meeting his stare with the cool expression of someone accustomed to dealing with drunks. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a soft drawl shaped to fit her cover. Maddox leaned in, breath warm, eyes cold. Behind him, his Marines rose from their seats with uncanny synchronicity. Not a stumble among them now. Their smiles peeled away like discarded masks. Emily's instincts snapped into place. She angled her body subtly toward the back door, evaluating distance, barriers, potential weapons. A bar towel, a heavy glass, the metal edge of the counter. Every object held a possibility, though using any of them risked drawing too much attention to the strength she wasn't supposed to have. Maddox tightened his grip, just enough to send a message. Emily remained still as a coiled wire. Then came the shift, the subtle repositioning of feet, the collective inhale of men preparing to strike. She saw it in Maddox's jaw, in the way one Marine rolled his shoulders back to free his arms, in the way another adjusted his weight to the balls of his feet. A fight was seconds away. Emily breathed once, slow and measured, the way she had been trained in the long nights before missions. "Let go," she murmured. Maddox didn't. And in the split second when the tension snapped, when noise returned in a violent rush, Emily moved first. Her wrist rolled, her stance shifted, and the strike she delivered was quiet, efficient, and precise. Pain shot through Maddox's arm, forcing his grip to break, and his momentum carried him forward, over the counter, landing hard among scattered bar mats. Chairs scraped. Marines surged. Customers started shouting. Emily braced herself, a serving tray already lifted to intercept the first blow. And even in the chaos, even with her pulse hammering in her ears, she kept her expression flat. Ordinary. Human. Because showing her true capability would jeopardize everything the mission depended on. But in that moment, surrounded, cornered, and exposed, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. The quiet part of her mission was over. The moment Emily lifted the tray to block the incoming punch, the sound rang through her arm like struck metal. The bar erupted, boots scraping, people shouting, glasses falling and shattering across the floor, but all of it blurred into distant noise. Her focus narrowed into something tight and controlled, a cold line of thought running beneath the heat of the fight. The Marine whose punch she intercepted stumbled back, shock flickering across his face. He had expected a bartender's panic, not the practiced precision of someone who understood exactly where to strike. Emily used that shock, stepping in with a deliberate movement and driving the edge of her hand into the narrow gap between his shoulder muscle and nerve. His breath left him in a sharp gasp, and he dropped to one knee, eyes wide. Another Marine moved behind her fast, too fast for a drunk man. His arms locked across her ribs, lifting her inches off the floor in a hold meant to pin, not harm. It was an extraction grip, something taught in training rooms, not something pulled from bar brawls. He knew exactly what he was doing. Emily reacted with instinct shaped by years of drills. She snapped her head back, connecting with the bridge of his nose. Bone cracked under the force. His grip loosened on reflex, giving her enough space to twist free, plant her feet, and drive her elbow into his solar plexus. The air burst out of him in a violent exhale as he folded forward, knees buckling. The bar fell into a stunned hush for a breath. A moment suspended, like the few silent seconds before a storm unleashes. Then chaos surged in again. People rushed for the doors. A table overturned. Someone shouted for the police. Another yelled that the fight was staged. Even without looking, Emily felt the fear ripple through the room like heat from a flame. She didn't blame them. 3 Marines pretending to be drunk had just revealed themselves as something far more coordinated. And they were here for her. Maddox climbed back over the counter with a slow, predatory steadiness, wiping blood from his lip with the back of his hand. The drunken mask was completely gone. His expression sharpened into something cold and focused, the look of a soldier receiving orders he never questioned. Emily kept her stance low, angled, protective. Her shoulder throbbed from the earlier impact, but she didn't let the pain distract her. She scanned Maddox's hands, watching for any sign of there. He reached into his pocket and flicked open a tactical folding knife. The blade caught the bar's dim light, glinting with a deliberate warning. Customers fled faster now. The last few scrambled toward corners, desperate to get out of the way. The hum of danger filled the space, thick and almost metallic. Emily stepped back, feeling a bottle behind her. She grabbed it, shattered it against the counter's edge, and raised the jagged glass with a steady hand. The knife didn't scare her. The intent behind his eyes did. Maddox stepped in, each movement measured. He wasn't charging recklessly. He knew better than that. He advanced the way trained soldiers advance, slow, calculated, preventing her from slipping past or disarming him too easily. His voice was low, almost regretful. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Captain." The title hit like a physical blow. Her cover was broken. He knew who she was. Emily didn't answer. Her breathing stayed controlled, the kind trained under fluorescent lights and midnight drills. She waited for her moment. looking for the hitch in his steps or the angle of his wrist that would give her an opening. But the moment never came, because the doors slammed open with a thunderous crack. Military police stormed in, boots pounding in a synchronized rhythm that sliced through the chaos. The lights from their gear flashed across the walls, and voices barked commands with a precision that froze the room more effectively than any weapon. The Marines stiffened, and Emily exhaled, just a fraction. At the front of the group came Lieutenant Mark Ortiz, his face steady, calm, unreadable. Emily didn't know him well, but she knew his reputation. Methodical, controlled, unshakable. For a heartbeat, she believed it was over. But Maddox wasn't finished. He lunged. Fast. Too fast for someone trying to escape. His knife sliced past her ribs, sharp pain tearing through her side as the blade grazed flesh. Emily turned with the momentum, caught his wrist, and used his weight to drive him into the floor. A controlled throw, clean, efficient, impossible to mistake for anything a civilian bartender could perform. Maddox hit the wood with a heavy, breath-crushing thud. His knife skittered across the floor. Two MPs moved in immediately, pinning him down, securing his arms behind his back. Emily staggered only slightly, one hand pressing against her side. Warmth spread under her palm, blood. She gritted her teeth. The adrenaline kept her upright, but her body trembled beneath the surface. Lieutenant Ortiz closed the distance in 3 sharp steps. "Captain Hartman," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "You're bleeding." She didn't want the acknowledgement. Didn't want the title spoken here. It felt like a curtain being pulled back in front of an unwilling audience. But Ortiz didn't wait for her response. His eyes swept the room, taking in the Marines on the ground, the shattered glass, the overturned chairs, the trail of chaos that pointed unmistakably to a coordinated attack. "Get her to medical," he ordered. Emily resisted the instinct to argue. The room swayed once, a warning. She steadied herself against the bar, breath shallow. The MPs secured Maddox and the others quickly, their movements efficient and unquestioning. Even as they hauled the Marines away, Emily saw something in Maddox's eyes. Not hatred, not anger, recognition. He hadn't been hunting her. He'd been following orders. That realization nested somewhere deep inside her, heavy as stone. Minutes later, as the last of the MPs cleared the room and Maddox stepped in, Emily's vision blurred at the edges. The pain in her side sharpened, and the sounds around her softened into distant echoes. She allowed the medics to guide her toward the exit, her boots dragging slightly across the floorboards she had wiped down so many times. As she passed through the doorway, she cast one final look back at the bar. A place meant to be quiet cover. A place now shattered. And she understood, clearly, painfully, that everything had changed. Her mission was no longer a hidden investigation. It was an exposed battlefield. The medics worked quickly, guiding Emily into a secure transport van that hummed softly as it moved toward the restricted medical wing of the base. She kept her hand pressed against the wound along her side, feeling the ache sharpen with every breath. The adrenaline had faded just enough for pain to find its way through, bringing a dull, pulsing throbbing that spread from her ribs to her spine. The world outside the van blurred into passing shapes of sunlight and shadow. She tried to focus on them, to keep her attention anchored so she wouldn't slip into the numb haze threatening to pull her under. The medic across from her, a woman with cropped blonde hair and steady hands, watched her with a careful calm. "You're lucky," the medic murmured as she wiped blood from Emily's side. Another inch, and he might have hit something major. Emily didn't answer, not out of rudeness, but because her mind was somewhere else, still caught in the flash of Maddox's eyes when he lunged, the precision of his strikes, the way he had said her title with certainty. "Captain." Her cover hadn't just cracked. It had shattered. By the time the transport doors opened onto the sterile gray corridor of the medical facility, her thoughts had tangled into an uneasy knot. But she stepped out without assistance, refusing the medic's offered arm even though her legs wobbled faintly beneath her. She wouldn't show weakness. Not here. Not now. The medics led her into a small treatment room where bright lights glared overhead. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled the air. As she lay back on the narrow bed, her gaze fixed on the ceiling tiles, holding onto their ridged patterns to stay steady while 2 medics stitched her wound. She felt each tug, each pull of the thread, but she forced her breathing to remain level. When the door opened again, she didn't need to look to know who had arrived. She recognized the calm presence instantly. Colonel Marianne Reeves entered first, tall, poised, carrying a tablet that already looked overloaded with information. Behind her came Lieutenant Mark Ortiz, hands clasped behind his back, posture unchanged, as if the chaos at the bar had never occurred. Reeves didn't speak at first. She waited until the medic stepped back and tied off the final stitch before she approached the bedside. "Captain Hartman," Reeves said, her voice quiet but edged with urgency. "We need to talk." Emily pushed herself slowly into a seated position, careful not to strain her side. "I assumed as much." Ortiz moved closer, his expression more guarded than before. Maddox didn't resist after he was restrained. He answered basic questions, but he kept repeating that he believed he was acting under official counterintelligence orders. Emily felt a cold ripple run through her. Orders from whom? Reeves tapped the tablet, bringing up a file. "That's where it gets complicated." Emily's eyes locked onto the screen. The image displayed was of Maddox, service record, commendations, deployment history. His background was clean, almost too clean. "There should have been signs," Emily murmured, scanning the details. "There weren't," Reeves replied. "And that's the problem." The colonel tapped again, and another profile appeared, a different name, an older face. Colonel Grant Westfield, Special Programs Procurement Division. The room seemed to cool by several degrees. Emily's heartbeat slowed, a deep heaviness settling in her chest. She knew the division. Everyone in military intelligence did. Procurement controlled access to equipment, weapons, and classified technology. Corruption in that field wasn't just dangerous, it was catastrophic. Reeves watched Emily carefully. His name appeared in 2 intelligence flags connected to diverted shipments. Discreet mentions. Nothing concrete, but enough to raise suspicion. Emily absorbed the information slowly, her fingers unconsciously curling against the edge of the bed. "You think he's directing?" "The Marines?" "We think he's directing something," Reeves answered. "And Maddox may only be one small piece." Silence stretched across the room as Emily processed the weight of the revelation. Reeves waited, as she always did, giving Emily the space to work through her thoughts without pressure. "What about the deposits?" Emily asked finally. Ortiz nodded as though he'd been expecting the question. Several Marines connected to Maddox received unexplained payments in staggered intervals. Nothing large enough to trigger immediate red flags, but consistent, patterned, and all routed through civilian shell accounts. "So they were used," Emily said quietly. "Manipulated." "Most likely," Reeves confirmed. "But whether they knew the full scope of what they were doing remains uncertain." Emily leaned back slightly, her side burning with each movement. The room felt too small now, too bright, too sterile. Her mission had just shifted from a simple undercover sweep to a confrontation with high-ranking corruption, and she knew what that meant. She would be going back into the field. Reeves pulled a chair beside the bed and sat, something she only did when the situation demanded absolute seriousness. "Emily, this goes deeper than we thought. And now that your cover's blown, we can't expect the enemy to sit still." Emily met her eyes, steady. "I know. We need you on the next phase," Reeves continued. "But it's going to require working with Maddox." The words hit harder than the knife wound. Emily stiffened. "You can't be serious." Ortiz answered this time. "He knows the drop points, the coded exchanges, the way the buyers approach their meetings. Without him, we're walking in blind." Emily exhaled slowly, a mixture of frustration and resignation settling in. She had faced hostile territory, betrayal, ambushes, but working beside the man who had pulled a knife on her hours earlier tested something deeper. Reeves seemed to read the reluctance in her posture. "You don't have to trust him," she said softly. "Just hear him." Emily nodded, though it felt heavy. "Then bring him in." Minutes later, the door opened again. Maddox entered with guarded steps, wrists freed but a monitoring device secured tightly around his ankle. His movements were stiff, part discomfort, part shame he couldn't hide. He didn't raise his head at first, not until he stood directly across from her. His voice was subdued, stripped of bravado. "Captain, I didn't know. I swear it." Emily held his gaze without blinking. She didn't respond, because anger and reason were tangled too tightly inside her. Instead, she let him continue. He explained the drop points near the harbor. The coded phrases. The strange instructions that never quite made sense, but came stamped with the authority of higher-ranking officers. As he spoke, Emily watched everything. His hands, his breath, the tremor hidden in his voice. She was trained to detect lies by more than words. And she didn't see deception, just guilt and confusion. When he finished, Reeves exchanged a glance with Ortiz, confirmation that they would proceed. Emily slid off the bed, ignoring the flare of pain in her side, and reached for her gear on the nearby table. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she checked her Glock 19, slid in a magazine, tapped it cleanly into place, and laid out the additional rounds she would carry. Behind her, Maddox watched in silence. The room had shifted. The mission had shifted. And Emily knew this was only the beginning. She holstered her weapon, straightened, and exhaled slowly. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Let's finish what they started." Night settled over the San Diego harbor like a heavy curtain, dimming the edges of the world until everything felt suspended between shadow and movement. The low clouds hung thick, muting what little moonlight tried to break through. It was the kind of night that swallowed noise, leaving only the distant creak of rusted metal and the soft hum of the security lamps flickering along the rows of shipping containers. Captain Emily Hartman moved in silence, each step deliberate and measured as she followed Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox through the narrow corridor of containers. Her wound ached beneath her jacket, pulsing faintly with each breath, but she forced the discomfort aside. There couldn't be hesitation. Not now. Not when the mission balanced on the thin line between success and chaos. The covert support team remained hidden along the perimeter, tucked behind crates and maintenance vehicles where they would remain unseen unless absolutely necessary. Emily heard their brief radio check-ins, soft static bursts, coded whispers, but she didn't need to respond. She felt them more than she heard them, shadows in the distance watching every movement. Maddox walked ahead of her, posture rigid, steps surprisingly careful for someone who only hours ago had been part of the attack against her. The tracking device at his ankle glinted faintly beneath the dim security light. Every so often, he glanced back, not nervously, not with fear, but with the quiet restraint of someone wrestling with too many thoughts he couldn't voice. Emily kept her distance, watching him with studied detachment. She didn't trust him, not fully, maybe not even partially, but she trusted the mission. And right now, Maddox was the only guide into the meeting they were heading toward. "Drop points rotate every few nights," he said quietly, not looking at her. "But Westfield's people prefer this spot when they're expecting big transfers." Emily didn't answer. She let the words settle, weighing them for accuracy. Maddox's shoulders tensed slightly, as if he expected doubt, expected her silence. But he continued walking, navigating the dark maze with ease. At the end of a long row of containers, the space opened into a small clearing lit by a single lamp buzzing overhead. A plain white cargo van sat parked near the far edge. 3 figures stood beside it, 2 young men dressed in civilian jackets and one older man with a posture too precise to belong to any ordinary buyer. Emily recognized him immediately. Colonel Grant Westfield. His presence here confirmed everything Reeves had suspected and more. The corruption wasn't rumor or possibility. It was flesh and blood, standing in the glow of a flickering bulb, ready to sell or trade weapons meant only for military hands. The air tightened around her. Maddox slowed, shoulders stiffening as he approached the group. Emily could sense the conflict in him, shame mixing with duty, guilt wrestling with the need to redeem what he had unknowingly helped enable. Westfield turned at the sound of their footsteps. His eyes slid over Maddox first, lingering only a second before drifting to Emily. His brow twitched, just barely, but she saw the recognition rise in him like a threat emerging from deep water. He knew exactly who she was. And that changed everything. Emily pressed a small transmitter hidden at the seam of her jacket, an unnoticeable flick of her thumb. The support team would be listening, watching, waiting for her signal. "Staff Sergeant," Westfield said, his tone smooth and controlled, the voice of a man accustomed to authority. "You brought a friend." Maddox swallowed. "She's part of the handoff." Westfield smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Of course she is." One of the younger men stepped closer, his face tightening with unease. He studied Maddox with unsettling intensity. Something shifted in his expression, Recognition, suspicion, or both? And he shouted two words that cracked the moment open like thin glass. She's arm. Chaos erupted. Gunfire snapped through the night, echoing off the metal containers. Shards of asphalt kicked up at Emily's feet as she dove behind a storage crate. She drew her Glock 19 in a clean, fluid motion and returned two controlled shots. Not to kill, but to force the men into cover. Maddox shouted directions, firing short bursts meant to keep Westfield's men pinned. He stayed close to her, surprisingly steady under pressure. Emily didn't question it. Not now, not while bullets screamed across the clearing. She tracked the rhythm of enemy fire, counting the seconds between their reloads. When the brief pause came, she slipped from her cover, fired twice, then dropped low as muzzle flashes sparked again from the van's far side. Team Alpha in position. A voice crackled softly in her earpiece. Awaiting your mark. Not yet. Not until she had eyes on Westfield. She scanned the clearing, searching. There, bolting toward the pier, coat flaring behind him as he sprinted with startling speed for a man his age. Westfield's running, she called into her mic. She didn't wait for a response. Emily broke into a sprint, boots hammering against the wooden planks as she chased him down the narrow pier. Ahead, a small boat engine revved, a driver already waiting, hands gripping the wheel. Westfield leapt aboard. Emily followed, pushing off the last boards and landing on the back deck with force that made the boat rock dangerously. She slid slightly but caught herself on a railing, her breath sharp and fast. Westfield whirled, striking first. His elbow slammed into her shoulder, pain radiating through her side as her stitches tore. She staggered but didn't fall. He swung again, and she blocked it, twisting his arm with precise leverage. He fought back with the desperation of someone who fully understood the cost of being caught. He slammed her against the console. She felt the sharp pull of torn flesh and bit down hard to keep her focus. Her grip tightened. With one smooth pivot, clean, practiced, relentless, she forced his arm behind his back and wrenched downward. Westfield gasped, collapsing onto the bench seat. She secured his wrists with a zip tie, breath trembling between clenched teeth. The boat's engine growled beneath them, the smell of fuel thick in the air. For a moment, everything stilled. The night, the noise, the fight. And Emily let herself breathe. When she turned her head, she saw Maddox standing on the pier, chest rising and falling, watching her with something unspoken in his expression. Not fear, not defiance, something closer to respect. The light from the security lamps flickered across the water as dawn very faintly touched the horizon, softening the edges of the harbor. Emily kept her grip firm on Westfield's restraints as the patrol craft pulled alongside to take him into custody. And for the first time since the mission began, she allowed herself to feel it, the shift, the turning point, the moment where survival faded into victory. But she also knew something else, something heavier. The hardest truths often waited after the mission was over. Morning slid over the harbor in quiet layers, soft gray first, then pale gold that stretched across the water like thin brushstrokes of light. The chaos from the night before had faded into a hushed stillness, leaving behind only the lingering echo of what had unfolded. Captain Emily Hartman stepped off the patrol craft as the cool breeze tightened around her, lifting strands of hair from her face. Her side throbbed in a deep, steady rhythm beneath the bandage, but she kept her expression composed as she handed Colonel Grant Westfield over to the security team waiting on the pier. Colonel Marianne Reeves stood near the edge, arms folded, exhaustion etched beneath her eyes despite the calm she tried to maintain. When she met Emily's gaze, there was no need for words, not at first. They both understood the cost of the night, the price taken piece by piece in moments too fast to track until the adrenaline faded and the bruises remained. It's done, Reeves said quietly. Emily nodded, her voice steady despite the ache in her ribs. For now, Reeves didn't correct her. She knew as well as Emily did that dismantling a corruption network didn't end with a single arrest. It was a root system hidden deep inside the institution, and removing one branch didn't guarantee the others wouldn't twist themselves back into place. Behind them, Staff Sergeant Cole Maddox lingered near the perimeter tape, his posture rigid, hands resting at his sides. Sunlight caught on the tracking device around his ankle, making it glint like a reminder of everything he had been drawn into. When his eyes lifted to meet Emily's, something shifted, subtle, but unmistakable. A quiet acknowledgement. A fragile trust. Something earned the hard way. He walked toward her with deliberate steps. "Captain," he said, clearing his throat. "If you ever need a statement, or if you think I should talk to the others, I'm ready." Emily studied him for a moment. She saw guilt still rising behind his eyes, heavy and raw, but she also saw resolve. He wasn't running from what he'd done. He was facing it, step by slow step. "We'll call you when it's time," she said. He nodded once, then stepped back, giving her space. Hours later, after the debriefings, the formal reports, and the hollow echo of questions she had answered too many times, Emily found herself standing alone inside a quiet hall lined with polished wooden floors. The faint smell of varnish mixed with the sterile scent drifting from a nearby office. Her uniform felt heavier today, pressed crisp and perfect, every ribbon and insignia aligned with careful precision. The ceremony was small, not the kind meant for crowds or headlines. Just a handful of officers standing by with subdued expressions. At the center, General Amanda Wolfenson stepped forward, her posture firm but her eyes warm. "Captain Emily Hartman," she said, her voice carrying gently through the hall. Emily stood at attention. "You acted with extraordinary judgment, restraint, and courage during an operation that threatened the safety of our personnel and national security. Your discipline prevented escalation. Your resolve dismantled a corrupt network hiding within our ranks. And your actions saved lives." The metal brushed against Emily's uniform as Wolfenson pinned it, a muted glint of metal that caught the light only briefly before settling against the fabric. Applause rose from the small audience, soft but sincere. The sound felt distant, as if coming through a long corridor. Emily inhaled slowly. She didn't chase the recognition. She didn't reach for pride. Instead, she felt something steadier, a quiet gratitude intertwined with a familiar resolve. As she saluted the general, a thought drifted through her, uninvited, but welcome. Some victories weren't loud. Some didn't come with cheers or headlines. Some lived in the shadows, built from choices no one would ever see. When the ceremony ended, Emily stepped outside the facility into the still sunlight. The air carried the scent of the ocean mixed with the faint aroma of fuel from distant ships. She paused at the steps, letting her eyes trace the horizon. For the first time in days, the world felt wide again, no longer compressed into narrow alleys of danger and urgency. She stood there for a long moment, thinking, remembering, understanding. Courage didn't always look like a charge into gunfire or a grand, heroic gesture. Sometimes it looked like restraint, or choosing the harder path, or fighting quietly in the dark so others wouldn't have to. She thought back to the bar, the rusted lantern, a place meant to be ordinary, a cover built on routine. Yet that night had unraveled everything, exposing a network hidden beneath years of polished paperwork and unchallenged authority. She remembered the way the air felt heavy before the Marines revealed their intentions, the way her instincts tightened with each shift in the room's atmosphere. She remembered every small choice she had made. The calm, the restraint, the precision. Those choices had shaped the outcome more than anything else. And none of them had been seen. Emily stepped down the concrete walkway, her boots echoing softly. The base was quiet, the day young. A transport vehicle waited near the curb, engine idling softly, ready to take her back to headquarters for final clearance. But she didn't open the door right away. Instead, she let her gaze drift farther, beyond the buildings, beyond the harbor, beyond the reach of command structures and mission reports. She imagined the countless individuals across the service who carried unseen battles, people whose courage wasn't captured in awards or salutes, the ones who endured quietly, the ones who chose integrity when no one was watching, the ones who stood firm, not for recognition, but because it was right. Their strength shaped the world more than anyone realized. Emily exhaled, a soft, steady breath. She hoped others might someday see that same truth, not just in her, but in all the quiet figures who held entire missions, entire systems, together from the shadows. Real courage lived there, in the choices hidden from the world, in the silence between moments, in the quiet resolve to do what needed to be done. Emily opened the vehicle door and stepped inside. As it pulled away from the facility, she looked out the window one last time. Sunlight played across the water, scattering into bright fragments that shimmered like pieces of forgotten stories. She didn't know what mission would come next, but she knew she would answer it. Not for applause, not for medals, but for the quiet truth that courage, real courage, endures even when no one is watching.